Drivers, start your engines!
Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there, I want you to be perfect!
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. It's him. He talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver. Pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger. No sweating working for the man, alright.
Good evening, race fans. Welcome to the Hoobazoo Radio Network, and welcome to Drafting the Circuits. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour as we go over this past week in racing and preview next week. Joining me in the studio, I have Richard Youden, Louise Torres, and Mr. Joey Barnes. How we doing, gentlemen?
Good, thank you.
Doing good, man.
It's going.
It's going. Louise, you're always so upbeat, I tell you. But so anyway, not a ton of racing this past weekend, with it being Father's Day. And also Juneteenth holiday as well. So the IndyCar guys were off, as were the NASCAR guys. We did have a Formula One run in Canada, and the SRX guys raced on Saturday night. So we'll get into that. But first off, some news I read this morning that Bruton Smith, who was the founder of the Charlotte Motor Speedway, and then later built him a bit of an empire of racetracks and whatnot, had passed away at the age of 95. And here's a guy that was really instrumental in NASCAR for quite a long time, responsible for some of the periods of large growth, some of the things that he did and whatnot. He was involved right there. So, sad to see him gone. Pretty, again, really instrumental guy. There's some folks who don't like some of the things he did when it come to, losing some of the older and smaller tracks off the schedule. But again, the world moves forward and not backwards. So now, Richard, in your years in NASCAR, do you ever have any time to interact with Bruton Smith or any of his folks with the Speedway Motorsports?
No, not a huge amount. Obviously, it's well known what he did for the sport, and in some ways, I guess you could consider modernizing it and harmonizing it with the. There's two ways of looking at it. You can harmonize it or monopolize it when you own such a large number of tracks that he did. But some of the facilities have certainly improved over the years if you look back at what they were like. So I think there's certainly some credit due there.
Yeah, I mean they were buying up some existing tracks for a time. I remember when the Kentucky Speedway is not far from my home. I remember when the Kentucky Speedway was sold and then purchased by Bruton Smith's company, and just the improvements were immediate. I mean, a lot of these muddy, grassy, hilly parking areas became paved. The restrooms suddenly became nicer. There suddenly became more grandstands, and then they got to place a cup date. Now that's all for naught. Now the place is sitting, being used as a storage facility now with no race dates. But when they did take it over, they put quite an investment in there, and it immediately improved what was already a pretty darn good racetrack to go to. So you really can't downplay his significance of just working with the tracks to build them into better facilities. But at the same time, some of the things that him and his partner in crime, I guess, Humpy Wheeler, his promoter, they really kind of pushed the envelope when it turned to making a race weekend into just a weekend of entertainment. Some of the interesting things they did there at the Charlotte Motor Speedway, particularly for the All-Star race. Now, Louise, you were telling me some of these things they've done.
Yeah, when you look at the stuff they did at Charlotte Motor Speedway, for example, they would make a huge emphasis on their pre-race entertainment, where they have like demo derby, like robot eating stuff, like metal, or human cannonballs, which they actually did had a human cannonball like between stages at Texas during All-Star Weekend, which was very unique. It's very which was a nice idea. It just caught me off guard while at the track because I was obviously focusing on what I usually do, writing and photography. But it's just little stuff where they go the extra leagues and boundaries to make these things happen. Yeah, and they had to do it in a short amount of time. Yes, there was a lot of fire and destruction, but for all the sake of entertainment for its time. And I think when we talk about sometimes racetracks need to kind of put emphasis on the pre-race stuff a lot more to get more people out there, whether it's NASCAR or IndyCar, whichever sanctioning body is at an SMI track or in general. You want to build entertainment, whether it's concerts or Crash Course TV, to make the price of admission worth it, because it's more than just racing these days in the eyes of the big companies.
Certainly. And if you look at some of the struggles IndyCar's having at filling up oval facilities, and part of the knock on oval race at Indies is there's just so much downtime and nothing to do, no entertainment, so when you figure a concept like this of just making the whole thing a big show, whether it be a guy on a motorcycle jumping over buses Evel Knievel style, or cars going through hoops of fire, anything to kind of keep you engaged and watching during the downtime when there's no race cars on the track. And I think Charlotte was the first one to have giant, enormous HD TVs put in for the jumbotrons. They're the first ones to do major upgrades for that. So
and when it comes to Bruton's legacy as well, he was one of those that kind of provided more tracks for NASCAR, because you have the ISC and then SMI, and they were able to kind of be toe to toe, but also provide different track varieties. Yeah, when you retroactively, to some people, there's some disdain with it, but at the end of the day, what he's able to do in NASCAR and racing in general can't be ignored, because he's done a lot of contributions in general.
Exactly. Yeah. So Bruton Smith passed away at the ripe old age of 95. Again, a major contributor to the sport of motor racing in general. So, but let's move on and let's talk about the Canadian Grand Prix, where once again Max Verstappen was victorious, and his closest championship rival, his own teammate, ran into some mechanical difficulty. His next closest rival, being Leclerc, started well in the back. So, Richard, let's talk about the race in Montreal a little bit.
Yeah, so you mentioned there Charles Leclerc starting in the back. I think that was one of the main talking points the whole weekend, based on the engine failure in Baku the previous week. Ferrari decided to fit Charles Leclerc's car with a new power unit, which took him over some of the limits. So he took a grid penalty, which basically put him to the back of the grid. Saturday qualifying was very, very wet, and was pretty eventful. Track drying throughout the day. Started on full wets, went down to intermediates, and George Russell at one point there at the end tried a lap on slicks and ended up against the tyre barrier, which wasn't the best end for qualifying for him. But Max started on pole with Alonso up there in P2 with Carlos Sainz there in third, which was great to see Alonso up there. He was fantastic in the wet. Really showed some of his prowess there. He's probably driving this year, I'd say, as well as he's ever driven. Which is testament to his fitness and dedication, especially considering the accident he had just before his return at the start of last year. The race was reasonably, I wouldn't say processional, but not a huge challenge for Max. He got done what he needed to get done. No real threat to him apart from at the end of the race there when Carlos Sainz went on an alternate strategy and pushed him at the end for the last 10-15 laps on fresher tyres after a safety car period for Tsunoda crashing at the exit of pit lane on cold tyres, which was a little bit embarrassing for the boy there. Good
Max,
Canadian Grand Prix.
Yeah, Max did have a little little moment of anxiety, I guess. Got a little heated on the radio with his team when they failed to get out ahead of Lewis Hamilton on a cycle of pit stops. But I mean, it was only a few corners later. Max was back out front. I mean, yeah, you know what I mean? As you get a little aggravated over nothing. But Max is pulling out a heck of a lead in the standings now. He's 175 points and 6 wins. Yeah, and Sergio's 129 points. So he got a pretty healthy lead. He's starting to run away with this thing.
Yeah, I mean, Sergio had a DNF, as did Mick Schumacher. But no, it was, I mean, it's almost 2 wins now ahead of Charles Leclerc, and you'd imagine he's his biggest rival. You know, even though Sergio's closer in points, the scary is the wrong word, but the concerning thing for most of the team out there, or most of the drivers out there, is that, you know, Red Bull have a big upgrade package coming to Silverstone, Austria, or France, one of the next few races, that apparently will address one of Max's big concerns with the car, is lack of front end grip. And apparently they say that's worth 2 to 3 tenths of a second a lap in terms of performance. So if he suddenly comes along with another 2 or 3 tenths and gets the car balanced as he'd like, then watch out, everybody, because that's
we're gonna see some of the Mercedes domination we've seen in the last couple of years.
Potentially, and it's obviously up to Ferrari how they're going to react, but they obviously still have their reliability issues at the moment. So
absolutely, now Mercedes Mercedes looks to be a bit improved. And they say they've kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? They've isolated their problem with the porpoising. But the end result to get that fixed is actually going to slow the car. So, which is not really great news for Lewis and George.
It's a bit of a balance, really. And it's a bit of a balance, but also they're playing games with the FIA a little bit, which I think is upsetting a few people. They actually ran Friday practice with a second floor stay, which was designed to stop the floor from flexing too much and hold it in place to stop this porpoising. And then that was deemed illegal, so they had to take that off the car. And it was almost as if Mercedes are sort of trying to back the FIA into a corner to allow them to run with a different, or change the regulations and the rules on this. The issues with the porpoising and the bouncing that we've been seeing, and a lot of the owners, team owners like Christian Horner, for example, is making comments along the lines of, well, if you watch Hamilton get out of his car at Baku, it was, a great piece of acting, and, he deserves an Oscar and all that sort of stuff for it. And I think there's a little bit of it, if you do have an issue with that, and you're trying to get the governing body to change it, you make sure that the driver sort of crawls out the car and winces and looks like he's in agony and all this sort of stuff. I'm not saying that this porpoising we're seeing is acceptable. Certainly something needs to be done, but I don't think it's as bad as Mercedes is making out to be. And at the end of the day, they do have the option of raising the ride heights, which will reduce the porpoising, admittedly slow the car down, but it's a balance. And on the same extent of that, both Ferrari and Mercedes and Red Bull are turning around and saying, well, hang on, why should we change the rules if we've managed to design a car that doesn't porpoise just because the Mercedes does? And it's a very, 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 very valid comment in my mind.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a sticky situation because initially the FIA approved the second floor stay, and then when other teams threatened to protest it, then suddenly now it's illegal. So I guess the FIA needs to look before they leap, or make sure they run something by.
It's this whole issue with the it's this whole issue that we're seeing going on at the moment with the FIA and the stewards at each event and all this sort of stuff, making sure that, everybody's on the same page and everything's going in the right direction. Because there's been a little bit, sort of Monaco with the pit lane exit potential violations and all this sort of stuff. There's a little bit of inconsistency there. And maybe with these new race directors, with Michael Massey obviously having been relieved of his duties, there's maybe a little bit of discontinuation there, and they need to get a little bit more common ground there, should we say.
And just kind of curious, I know I'm usually not on for the F1 type segments, but I was just kind of curious and wanted to ask this question to Richard is, you talk about, porpoising and how raising the ride height would cause you to lose a little bit of time. in some ways, and this is just me looking at it and with an eye test, but because I'm not an engineer, right? I'm far from it. But it almost seems like when you're having a car that dips and raises based on the ride height and the porpoising effect that it goes through, doesn't it seem like keeping that and not raising the ride height would actually like hurt the time more than raising it, just because of the impact of the drag from the bouncing, as opposed to raising it and then maybe hitting it, slicing a little bit? That sense.
You don't really get much reduction in lap time per se from this porpoising, because it's actually an effect of downforce that's being generated. So in the old previous generation's car, the aerodynamics of a car would push the car down into the track. With a ground effect car, the air flowing under the car actually pulls the car down onto the track. And when it bottoms out, that effect, what they call stalls, and raises the car suddenly. As soon as the car raises, you suddenly have the airflow, which again pulls it back down. The only area where you see real reduction in performance from porpoising is actually under braking. If you brake just at the point where you've bottomed out and the car's raised off the ground, you could lose. You're losing grip, so you don't have as much downforce at the point of braking. So your braking zone is going to be a little bit longer. We saw a little bit of that at the start of the season. But I think most teams have got on top of that feature now. But it's the biggest issue, I think, is more from drivability. And when you raise the ride heights, it doesn't really affect your performance in a straight line. It affects you more through the corners where you can't generate that same amount of downforce.
Right, but isn't the major problem with the porpoising the just kind of like the drivers getting banged around?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the vision's becoming blurry and they're suffering from back pain and the like. But yeah, so if you raise the ride heights, your straight line speed doesn't really drop very much. It's your cornering ability which reduces, because you don't porpoise in the corner because you're not going fast enough to generate enough downforce. Or to pull the car onto the ground, should we say. Cars are always bottomed out at high speed, because even though they're going in a straight line, at high speeds is when they've generated the most downforce, because they're being, the airflow over the wing is at the greatest speed, so you get a greater pressure differential, which pushes the car on the ground. So that's why you see the cars, even back in the previous generation of aero regulations, the cars would bottom out at high speed. But when you're bottoming out, that wouldn't stall the aerodynamic effect. It would just cause it to sort of scrape. Whereas now, obviously, it has a far greater impact on the performance. So straight line speed isn't really negated or affected by the porpoising. It's actually the cornering speed that is. And yeah, it's the concern, if you don't raise the ride height, is driver safety.
All right, wonderful answer, Richard. Joey, did that answer your question? I would imagine that it did. So moving on then. So it was you mentioned Alonso. Both the Alpines did well in qualifying. They also did pretty decently in the race. I mean, the result wasn't there, but they were both kind of stayed reasonably close to the front. They weren't able to hold off the Ferraris and the Mercedes at times, but Alpine is looking like they're moving up in the world. I mean, their guys are 9th and 10th in points right now. The only one ahead of them that's not among those top three teams is Valtteri and the Alfa Romeo. So they're both the Alpine guys are doing better than McLaren and whatnot. So it's good for them. So looked like Joey got kicked off.
Oh yeah, dropped off again. But Alpine are looking good. They really are. They've sort of stepped up. They're probably best of the rest at the moment on a consistent basis. Until teams like Aston Martin and McLaren sort of maybe up their game a little bit, they do look pretty strong. And that's one of the great things I think at the moment about the Formula One Championship. As we said in previous years, outside the top 2 or 3 teams, that midfield is very closely packed. Any given weekend or any given Sunday, you can have any order out there, and it's not a surprise to anybody. It's great to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the other kind of rumor swirling around F1 is that Latifi is about to be replaced at Williams, after the Canadian Grand Prix, which was, this past weekend. So have we heard anything more on that front there?
I don't think it's going to be mid-season, because obviously if they lose in mid-season, there's going to be financial implication to that. I imagine it will be at the end of the year when Oscar Piastri comes on board, who's the test driver, or the third driver, should we say, at Alpine, who's very, very highly regarded in a lot of circles in the Formula One paddock, and he would be loaned to Williams from Alpine, probably under the conception that Alonso will have another year at Alpine in 2023. And then Piastri will move over at the end of 2023 and take that seat.
All right, yeah, like I say, the rumors are pretty heavy that they were just going to dump this guy mid-season, but
I
do know.
I only heard it through one source, and that's about it. I haven't heard it from the more reliable ones.
Yeah, I mean, Latifi brings a lot of money to the table.
That he does, and Williams, we know, needs the money.
Yeah, although saying that, you look at, I was reading an article about the rise of the Formula One franchise and how, Dalton Capital bought Williams for $150 million, 2 years ago. And the going rate now for Williams would be $750 million because of the entry and the revenue streams associated with Formula One at the moment. So, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of the existing teams are reluctant to get a team like Andretti on board, because they'll see this still diluted revenue stream. It's certainly, you say the teams need money, but this is the first time in living memory, I think, that I can remember there not being this team may not make it to the end of the season sort of thing. And the budget cap's helped that massively, I think.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah. I mean, the budget cap has just done wonders for, tightening up the field as well.
Yeah, for the most part. And speaking of, another side note of silly season is that Gasly will stay with AlphaTauri. I know we were talking about a couple weeks ago that if they were about the whole McLaren and Daniel Ricciardo thing, if maybe that's where Gasly goes. But like I emphasized, it seems like AlphaTauri wants to be their own identity rather than just be the Red Bull Junior. So keeping Gasly may do them wonders over time even more by having him around a couple more years, because he's proven himself to be the guy that kind of carries that torch for the team that wants to be more than just the quote-unquote junior program.
Yep. No, I wouldn't disagree with that there.
And speaking of Red Bull junior programs, we had another situation where what was his name? Vips or Vips? Yuri Vips
yeah.
Suspended for, again, usually using, I guess, racially insensitive and homophobic language.
Taken from the Carl Larson School of Diplomacy, I think.
Yeah, I mean, here we are on a live video game stream. I'm like, when I don't understand. Number one, how people kind of freely use that language to begin with, but then, in a public setting, when you're in the public eye. So here's a guy who's been suspended, and I'm sure he'll have to do the whole sensitivity training and the whole. But this guy's not a Kyle Larson level talent. You know what I mean?
No.
This may be the end of this poor guy. But again, it's ridiculous that these silly things happen to these guys.
Well, you're right. But to the same extent, I'm not being disrespectful to him. These guys at this level don't have a huge amount of responsibility in their day-to-day work. So for somebody to say, one of your responsibilities is don't make racial slurs in any domain, it's not exactly asking much of him. And, you'd like to think he wouldn't do that anyway, period. Never mind being reminded not to do it. And it's a very, very fine line that they walk. And I think that there was a case a few years ago of an athlete in the UK missed a random drugs test and got banned, and everybody said, "Oh, it's so unfair that he got unfair he got banned." But at the end of the day, the guys don't have many things that I've got to remember to do, like you or I do on a day-to-day basis. So, I'm quite critical of that sort of thing. They don't have a huge number of things they've got to get right, and that's one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. So we got a week off, and then we're on to Silverstone, which is your home Grand Prix.
It is, yes.
Yes, and I know you're excited for that in a couple of weeks. So, but until then, we'll have a week off. Now, we did have a SRX race, the opening race of the year down in Pensacola, Five Flag Speedway, and it was our good friend Hello Castroneves, who initially wasn't planning on entering the race and ended up texting the guy, I guess, the night before the race or the Friday or the Thursday before the day before the race. And, hey, man, you got a car? Because I've my schedule's open. I can make it, and swoops on in and wins the race. So
the night before at the special 13th entry, and I know there was some confusion as to why is Castroneves not leading the SRX standings. And I think Don Hogg explained it because he was the quote-unquote post-entry, the 13th car. He doesn't get any points on top of the fact he wasn't running the whole SRX tour anyway. So in theory, they have Tony Kanaan as the championship leader after one round. But yeah, he shows up at a track that I don't think he's ever been familiarized before, goes out and beat Bubba Pollard to get the SRX win, get to climb the fence at a short track, and that's where we found out that he has a NASCAR race in the works for this season.
Evidently, he's going to have a car for Daytona. They made a deal. If he wins an SRX race, they'll put him in a car at Daytona. So that'll be certainly be fun to see. But anyway, the interesting thing about the SRX though is, right, you would expect the short track guys and dirt guys and stock car guys to do well, but it's kind of amazing how well the IndyCar guys have adapted to this. If we recall last year, Marco Andretti won one of these races. And, Ernie Francis, who's got a lot of open wheel background, has done well in this series. Kanaan is doing well in this series. So, Richard, are you familiar with what the makeup of the SRX cars are? They a little lighter than a stock car that maybe that it somehow appeals to the IndyCar guys?
Potentially, yeah. There's, it still is conceptually a stock car, in name. But yeah, maybe the drive or the incentive is a little bit stronger with some of the IndyCar guys. Maybe they're trying to prove a point, and some of the more mature stock car guys are seeing this as they don't quite have the same level of competitive juices that some of the IndyCar guys have. I think you see the IndyCar guys are like Formula. A lot of these open wheel guys, they'll race anything. They race themselves to the bathroom stall. At some of these events. Whereas I think that in some of the stock car guys, that maybe those, I say that sort of incentive and that mentality isn't quite as prevalent.
Yeah, I mean, either way, it's good to see these big names from different series competing against one another.
Sure.
Reminds you of the old IROC that we used to have, which and IROC ended up becoming a parody of itself towards the end. But this thing is it's fun to watch. It's all short tracks. You know what I mean? It's all these grassroots, just not even big high level short tracks. So. But they got these big names here. They fill the stands, little places like Pensacola. So that'll be fun to watch. I think they've got what is it, six races?
They got five
something
more.
Like that, yeah.
Five more afterwards. They're heading to South Boston with the hero driver being Peyton Sellers.
Right. Yeah, they have the local track champion at each track, don't they?
Yeah, they have a local, or in the case of Bubba Pollard, he had like the best average finish in a series that they had down there a couple months ago. I know Cole Williams will be the hero driver for Nashville at the fairgrounds because he got the fan vote over Pollard, Stephen Nasse, and Brittany Zamora. And that Nashville race is where we'll have Joseph Newgarden compete in a couple weeks.
Yeah, again, yeah, another IndyCar guy in there. Yeah, and we've got other, top name. We got like Bill Elliott's going to do a couple races, as well as Chase Elliott. So that'll be interesting to see. You know what I mean? And then the races are on CBS, so they're it's not like they're buried on MAV TV or something like that. So
No, they got national CBS and on Paramount Plus. And side note, behind Elio and Bubba was Ryan Newman, who finished third, which was, I think, based on what I've read and heard, that maybe SRX was kind of reignited his interest in racing, because obviously the last few years in NASCAR didn't turn out so well for him. That kind of like the fun kind of went away for him. And I think SRX, I think at the end of the day, it has its purpose to kind of bring guys to have some fun again in racing. Those who have been in NASCAR for a long time.
Yeah, I think, and to your point, some of the other guys that are in there are just having fun, like your Paul Tracy's and your Willie T. Ribbs, those kind of retired guys that just get that, still got that little competitive itch. So, but anyway, speaking of IndyCar guys, now Joey, we are at the halfway point of the IndyCar season. I know you published an article on TobyChristie.com, kind of like a driver-by-driver analysis at the halfway point. So let's break this down a little bit. Let's talk about the IndyCar season at the halfway mark.
All right. Yeah, cool. Let's do it. I don't even know where you want to begin, but
you could start at the top, or you could start with who's disappointed you most. I don't know, wherever you like to start, whoever you want to talk about. The rest of us love to talk about IndyCar guys as well.
So we got 8 races down, 9 to go. Marcus Ericsson, the championship leader. Been a few good surprises, Marcus being one of them. His drive at Indy was something else. And, you look further down the leaderboard and you start to kind of look at some of the guys that are outside the top 10, and it's kind of shocking because you wouldn't have expected to see Colton Herta, Graham Rahal, even Grosjean, with all the hype that we had heard during the off season. You would have kind of marked them to be guys that are in. And you would have thought maybe guys that, maybe Simon Pagenaud, even though he's ultra talented, a champion, Indy 500 winner, sitting right in 10th, but new team in Meyershank Racing, you might have tossed him on the outside a little bit. So it speaks volumes about what they've been able to do. It's interesting when you finally get a chance to look at all the stats when everything's all said and done. And it's interesting to hear the feedback during the season. You everybody hears it, right? Like, and you make it sound like not you personally, Frank, but the media in general. We all make it sound like certain people are having the most disastrous years ever. Like everybody was looking at Rossi, Alexander Rossi, and thinking he was just having an absolute stinker of a season. And it's not at the dominant level that he once had in 18 and 19, right? But man, the consistency is there. After 8 races, he's sitting right around there. He's the only Andretti driver in the top 10, which is ironic since he's also leaving the team at the end of the year, which kind of speaks volumes in itself when you see the fact that the rest of the cast is outside the top 10. And it just, sometimes it's not as bad as it seems. 9 races ago, I think and we can break this all down, but one of the things that I'm taking from the early part of the season is Scott Dixon being kind of exactly where he probably wants to be to some degree. I mean, obviously he'd rather be leading the championship, but when you look at how he's won some of his championships in the past, starting cold, getting streaky, getting real hot from the halfway point on, this is typical past Scott Dixon territory. That said, I can't help but think about Indy and how big of a change that is from that late pit road speeding penalty, where he was in all likelihood going to finish at least second in the 500, right? Like battling with Pato. Mm-hmm. He looked like he was a surefire guy to win the thing, possibly just end up relenting to second at worst, ends up coming away 21st in a double points paying race.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's all the difference for, except Ericsson stay at the top there, that big points payday at Indy. But yeah, Dixon was, he looked to be absolutely unbeatable at Indy, and the only guy that could beat him was himself. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. And I look at that thinking that even though this is kind of where we expect Scott Dixon to get hot, you've got to look at that and there's got to be a note there, right? There's just got to be something that you look at that and go, damn, like, and you feel good for him because, no one's going to feel worse about that than Scott. I mean, we saw it at the images of post race, right? I mean, this guy's a 6-time champion, already won the Indy 500, already a legend, but the magnitude of how much this still means to him is awesome to see, but it's also painful whenever it's a situation like that. So I'd be very interested to see if they can right the ship with qualifying better. It'll make Sunday's race days a little bit easier, with the exception of Indy's pole. It's been really rough on the qualifying side. And then I think equally, Alex Palou, he's kind of fallen off being Mr. Consistent that we all knew him to be, where he had like a podium 1 every 3 starts. It's fallen down a little bit. Now it's like 1 every 5 or 1 every 4. It's still really freaking good, but you start to look at that and you see the situation with Ericsson and the clash at Road America, a little bit of kinks in the armor, so to speak. And you start to wonder if Ericsson, with all his consistency that he's built up, everybody's looking at Grosjean. That's the sexy pick this year. There's nothing overly sexy because Ericsson doesn't have that flamboyant personality. He's not been known as a man on fire. Hopefully that never comes to be either, also, by the way. But you start to look at this and you start to look at this, though, and it's like, man, Ericsson is so consistent. It's going to be really hard to beat him unless he hits a bad run. And it happens to everybody. It's happened to Palou, and you didn't think it would happen to Palou. But, man, in his own team, you'd be hard-pressed to say that Ericsson isn't the favorite right now.
I know, and when you consider who his teammates are, you know what I mean? He's got, Chip's got three pretty solid cars in there, and Ericsson's leading. So, and of course, with that lead there, he's gonna, the team will make sure that they kind of keep him there. So, and the other guy, I think you just really got to watch out for, because you've consistently had to watch or championship wise, is Newgarden.
I'm glad you brought him up.
Yep, because he is, he had a couple of miscues early in the season, but he's right there, and he's a consistent winner.
Mm-hmm. The only one with 3 wins so far.
Exactly.
He's the only multi-time winner this year through 8 races. He's got almost half of them.
And $1 million better off for winning those 3 races as well.
Yeah. I tell you what's more staggering with that is, and I had mentioned this in the article that you had mentioned earlier, is Frank, is this is only 8 races with a new race engineer, Eric Lytle, who was never a race engineer prior to this, right? He comes in, he replaces Gavin Ward, who is a very accomplished engineer who's been in Formula One, been in that paddock, come over here, won titles with Newgarden, and, goes on and departs for Arrow McLaren SP, and they slide Eric Lytle in there. And, here we are, 3 races, 3 wins, and right now, and this is no joke, this is the quickest that Newgarden has ever won 3 races in a season. And like he's won 4 in 1 year, and that's the most he's ever had in 1 season. But this was the 23rd win of his IndyCar career. And you just got to think, like, in that kind of form, if they could just nail down some consistency, you'd be hard pressed to think that he's just not going to start to carry this thing. Because we go to 2 races in Iowa, which, hey, who would have thought a doubleheader in Iowa at a place that Penske could win with Newgarden, who does nothing but win in Iowa? Who would have known that would have been the schedule that would have come out? But, Newgarden can take 2 wins there. He could win anywhere. I mean, hell, it's proven already. But I think he's going to be tough to beat. I think Will's been consistent, but I think Will's going to have to win a little bit more. That's just my gut feeling. And equally, I think that if Dixon's capable of getting on a tear, I mean, look, any of these guys, if they get into their true form, they're going to be unbeatable. I think
it's honestly hard to disagree, is for sure, because I think Power, he's got to have to rack up those wins, like you said. And as for Dixon, he just needs to win, period. It's been over a year.
I'll be honest. I think the cutoff spot right now, when I'm really starting to look at this championship race and I go through the whole running order, I mean, I think you look at, I think you probably can be where Rossi's at. And I think the top 7 right now are fighting for this thing right now, unless something dramatically happens to change the swing of things and brings Felix in or McLaughlin in the 9th spot, you can't see Colton coming up from 11th. Yes, he can get onto a hot streak of wins, but we've all seen kind of a history there that unless he starts to grow from some of those mistakes, there's going to be probably 1 or 2 blips there. If you look at just the trend, right? And you look at Grosjean, he hasn't even proven he could win in the IndyCar series yet. I know it's harsh, but that's just the reality. And yeah, so I don't think you can be farther back than where Alexander Rossi is right now at 75 points back. I think if you're farther than that, you probably shouldn't be thinking championship at this point. You should probably just think, let's plug away and try to get some wins and see where we shake out after Nashville. And maybe with 3 to go, we can start to really think about this.
Yeah, the other interesting one there that's past the your cutoff line there is McLaughlin, who started out the season so strong. You know, won the season opener, nearly won at Texas. Had it not for Newgarden, passed him at the end there. But since then, he's kind of, fallen off the radar while his 2 teammates have been solidly consistent. So, and again, it's, I don't know if you want to call it a sophomore jinx or whatnot, but he is a very accomplished racer. But still, he's got very few, IndyCar starts overall. He's just got a season and a half behind him. So, but I do see probably McLaughlin getting it together a little more and maybe playing spoiler for a couple of wins here, taking away from these other guys that could really use them.
Well, no doubt. And, I think that, for all intents and purposes too, I mean, just because I just kind of said the top 7 championship challengers doesn't mean that we can't have guys that are on the outside, like all the way back to maybe 15th, that could maybe rise and push that envelope for a top 10 or even top 5 finish in the championship. But and again, this is just my opinion. It's not worth anything other than what you're paying for to listen to this podcast. But I start to look at this though, and we haven't had that. The Indy GP kind of qualifies because it was a monsoon. It was kind of nutty, but we had a person that you thought was going to be a typical winner and a typical podium is about how that race played out. We're still due. There's always one every year. We're still due with that one wacky race, right? The one that you get the unpredictable winner. Like you remember the Gateway race, we had the oldest podium in the history of IndyCar with like Sato and Bourdais and all them up on the podium. I think TK was there too, if I remember right. Maybe I got that wrong.
You're thinking about 19 when it was Kanan finishing 3rd for Foyt?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the one with Sato beat Carpenter.
Okay. Yeah. So, but it's like the oldest podium in the history of IndyCar or whatever, or the 3rd oldest, however they worded it. But then you look at some of these rookies, and I have been so impressed with Kirkwood. The results don't back up everything that he's done, but when you start to look at the pace that he's extracting from a Foyt car in comparison to everybody else, it's insane, especially on the street courses, which I think shows where the true talent is. Having to pick up the grip level, having to increase, having to adjust. I think that's where talent really shines as far as like the IndyCar calendar goes. And then I look at, obviously David Malukas has been quick. Taku and him have grown together and it's been a fun team to watch. And then, I mean, you have to be impressed with Callum Ilott, right? Like we all know his history, 2020 Formula 2 championship runner-up, arguably should be in a Formula 1 seat right now. And goes to a Juncos Hollinger team. Juncos couldn't barely make the grid, let alone get a top 10 finish. And he goes and plugs away a top 10 finish for him in his, 11th start for the team. And, it's just our 10th start with the team, excuse me. And you just start to look at that. He also gets an 11th place finish for him. So within literally less than a dozen races for them, gives them their 2 best finishes in the history of them being in the sport. And they've only had 24 races under their belt, give or take. And it's just, they're a solo team. They don't have any help. Everything they do is based on his feedback and based on what the engineers can do. So I know he's kind of in the silly season rumor mill to maybe be at a bigger team, certainly deserves to be in that conversation. Equally, it is a hell of a lot of fun to see a small team take it to the big guys, similar to what we used to see with Bourdais and KB Racing and things like that. That's what this kind of reminds me of, except he's helping build a program literally from the ground up. And it's, I hope we get to see more of it, honestly. And I think him, Lucas, even Kirkwood. I think they could be sneaky to get a podium or even in the right strategy, the right situation, a win. If I'm being honest.
You know as well as I do, some of these street races and road courses, you're only one ill-timed caution away from the field getting inverted, and guys you wouldn't expect suddenly up front, while guys that were leading are suddenly mired back in the field because of the timing of the caution. So, anything could happen. Like you said, there's always that one wacky race, and we really haven't seen it yet this year.
Yeah, and what's funny is I don't know why, but I keep thinking Gateway. I mean, Gateway is always kind of that weird, unique race. It's a unique race layout length. It's usually, it's a Saturday night. It's usually kind of got that weird energy, the weird atmosphere around it. And cautions, because of how quick the lap times there. Typically, when a caution falls there, it really jacks stuff up, right? Because you could put a guy 2 laps down with how your in laps, your out laps, and your pit road time is. So, I don't know. That one's on my radar as kind of a wonky one that maybe you see something fun at.
Yeah, but, Nashville's the other one on my radar to say that we could have a kind of an odd result. I mean, who would have thought that, Ericsson would have got his car airborne on lap 1 and nearly crash out and end up winning this thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy too. You think about the dirt, think about that for a second. I don't want to go on another. I'm bad about tangents, especially today. I've talked to a lot of people and ended up on tangents, but, Ericsson gets airborne, should have probably been out of the race, right? Wasn't, rebounded, won the thing. And everyone's like, oh, it speaks to the durability of an Indy car. And then you go look at how light of a hit Ericsson and Palou had last weekend at Road America that knocked Palou out of the race completely. It very much was a very light hit, but it was just enough to knock Palou out. And I don't remember if it was Luis that had the stat that was the second time he had ever had a last place finish in his career. But
it may sound right. I haven't checked on who had how many career last place finishes in quite a few times, because I've been kind of shifted on the NASCAR side of things lately with the on-sites.
I saw it somewhere though, and it speaks to the volume of how good Palou is. But yeah, so going to be interesting kind of moving forward. Going to be interesting to see some of the silly season moving parts. Depending on who you talk to, it sounds like half the field's going to change hands with the way some people make it sound. I don't think we're going to have that, but I wouldn't be surprised if we get 1 or 2 shockers in different rides come 2023, some household names moving places. It's going to be interesting. And I think a lot of that really depends on what happens this month of July. 5 races and 6 weekends or what have you, something like that. Big chunk of the schedule all over again. And going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we've got Mid-Ohio coming up soon, and then followed by Toronto, and then we've got the doubleheader out there in Iowa. So, very, very busy month of July for these guys, and a lot could change. So, but speaking of household names going different places, I mean, the other thing I look at in the point standings is, Castroneves coming off his season where he won his 4th Indy 500, mired way back in the points. He just can't seem to buy a break this year, even though the engineers are giving them the reasonably good car. Evidenced by Pagenaud's doing pretty well with that. So that's another guy that we've probably got to keep an eye on, particularly for like Gateway and perhaps Iowa.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to keep an eye on with Elio. I think all of us think the world of him. Mega talent and just amazing personality, right? Just oozes charisma all the time. The tricky part with that is him and Pagenaud, before the season started, both talked about how they're prepared for a challenging year. They're prepared to maybe at some race weekends be right there in the thick of it, battling for something positive. And then other times it's going to be a really tough weekend. And, for whatever reason, this hasn't quite hit positively for as much for Elio as it has for Simon. The way that they're extracting stuff, both of them are kind of carrying over their experience from Penske, so they're able to change a few things. But I also think that there's something to be said for you go to Penske, and at one point there was like 4 cars, everybody sharing information, and whoever hits on that setup, a lot of guys have similar feedback, similar setups. But but Elio and Simon couldn't be more different in their setups, right? They don't like the same things in cars. One prefers one super free, one prefers it to be a lot less free. Things like that. Some of their preferences on where that freeness comes from is certainly another factor too. And for whatever reason, they just haven't hit on it with Elio. So he definitely, of many of the guys that need something really positive, he's definitely on that list, because we know what he's capable of, and he's previous race winner at Iowa. We're going there twice. And obviously he's going to be a threat at Gateway, you'd like to think. There's just, for whatever reason, they're just not quite hitting on it. And, this is a shared data program with Andretti. Let's not forget. And, when you start to look at that, the only two Andretti drivers / Andretti affiliated drivers are Rossi and Pagano, and one is 7th and one is 10th. And then you've got to look at Herta and Romain Grosjean and 11th and 12th, and then on back. I don't know. I don't want to get too overly critical of a program without knowing everything, that's all the details going in, but you start to look at this and wonder the direction of things and if they're spread too thin on things. And you start to ask, because it's been quite a bit since Andretti's been consistently competitive across the board. The way that we've seen Ganassi be competitive right now is what we were accustomed to seeing Andretti be for a little while, where it was a revolving door of Rossi and Hunter-Reay and so on and so forth. And, even before Rossi got there, it was Hunter-Reay and Takuma, or not Takuma, sorry, Tony Kanaan. And, it just,
Dario and Weldon. Yeah. They put a string of championships together between 2004 and 2012, with a few gaps in there, but they haven't won a championship since 2012 with Hunter-Reay. Now, mind you, they've had some great results at the 500, which makes a lot of headlines and great for momentum for your team, great for morale for your team. But it's been a while since they really have had a serious challenge for the championship. You got to figure 2017 or 18, Rossi had a pretty good shot at bringing the title home and fell a little short.
Well, but it was 18 when he and Hunter-Reay were in the mix. Well, albeit Hunter-Reay was a long shot at best, with Rossi being the true threat that year.
I'll tell you right now, though, 18, that was the year Dixon won, if I remember correctly. It's off the top of my head. I don't have my notes in front of me on that, but I remember Dixon's average finish that year was absolutely video game disgusting, because Rossi finished second in that championship. And I think his average finish was still like a 4.3 or a 4.6 or something like that. Like, if you go look it up, his top fives and everything, his average finish was within the fours, which meant Dixon's was somewhere around like the late threes or the high fours, just barely beat him on that. It's just absurd. And when you go look at like Alex Palou, for instance, last year, I think his average finish was around a 6 or a 5 or a 6 and won the title. So you could argue that Rossi's season in 18 was definitely worthy of a title. It's just, unfortunately, what he came up against. But to go a step further, you're talking about the 500, Frank. Unless I'm missing a year, and I might be totally off, but 2017 Takuma Sato.
Right. Yeah, you're correct. Yeah.
That's 6 years ago. 16, we're talking about half a decade.
17. Yeah. Because then you had a couple of Penske guys after that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then you had Taku again in 2020, and and obviously Ericsson this year. So I just, I don't know. I know that Andretti is definitely building an empire that's all over the place with Formula E and all these other things. And it's fun to see, and it's fun to see where all these go. And you want to see them thrive, and you want to see success, because witnessing that type of stuff is just awesome. But at the same time, you don't want to see things get spread out just for the sake of being part of the party. You'd like to see some success too. And it's, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the engineering quality. I don't know if it's the feedback. I don't know if it's a damper program or where the shortcomings are there, but for whatever reason, they're just not hitting their maximum potential. They're not that far away, right? It's IndyCar racing. Everyone's a tenth within hitting something and just going on a run. That's how crazy special this series is with the amount of talent. Like, even when you're bad, you're still really freaking good. And they're just not in that top tier conversation right now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we've had this discussion on and off all season long, whether it's the fact that Michael himself is too distracted with the whole Formula One ordeal and what he's trying to do there. And he's just not involved in the day-to-day operations of the IndyCar team as like he once was. But yeah, there's probably a number of different factors. You probably can't put your finger on just one, but I think that, Rossi's given them some good momentum the last couple of weeks, and hopefully, he can go on a run here in July because there's some tracks there that favor him. So that'll be fun to watch. See if he can bring that together. So that being said, we are kind of up against the clock here, but Louise, where are we off to in NASCAR? We're going to the Nashville Super Speedway next. Is that correct?
Yep. All three series are going to Nashville Super Speedway.
All right. So we could take a few moments to preview that race and then make our picks.
Yeah, for sure. As far as Nashville on the cup level, I'm going to go with Kyle Busch in this one.
Okie dokie. And Joey, what do you think? What do you think about the concrete Nashville?
This is kind of wild, and most of this is just. I actually think Ricky Stenhouse. He does good on that kind of track surface. And usually a player at Bristol races and things like that, and even Dover. I think that kind of plays to his advantage. So I think he kind of gets it done. Okay.
Yeah, that is it's a little bit out there of a pick. It's been a while since Stenhouse won a race. And I want to say his only wins have been on restriction play races, have they not? Is that correct, Louise? Yeah.
Well, for 2017, which is mirroring Jimmy Spencer's Cup career, but I feel like Stenhouse has been much better. They've been getting better over time, but the question remains that team's future, which we could talk about at some other time.
Yeah. So who do I like for? I want to say probably one of the Hendrick cars, and I'll go with Bowman. Because they've why not? So speaking of Hendrick, another little news blurb today that Jimmy Johnson is hoping to get together with Hendrick when they enter Le Mans next year. He's just waiting to see the IndyCar schedule to see if he's going to have an opening in his schedule to run at Le Mans.
I don't think it's Hendrick. I think it's Action Express with the Cadillac.
Okay.
I don't think he's wanting to drive the garage, whichever one it is. The Hendrick bonus car.
Well, the story I read was that he wanted to reunite with Hendrick for Le Mans, but I think that was on sportscasting.com or one of them crap ones that pop up on my inbox.
Because Jimmy is a part-time driver with Action Express in the 48 car for that team, and Action Express are the main customer for the new Cadillac DPI endurance car. So there's obviously a very, very strong link, and I think Action Express have confirmed they're looking at doing Le Mans next year with that car. So it wouldn't surprise me if that didn't.
That would make more sense, than the Hendrick thing. Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, compete for a possible win and more bragging rights, whereas the Garage 56 Hendrick entry is not going to rack up any resulting order. It's just enter to not to be more than just a test run, but to compete in Le Mans to have that.
I mean, if Jimmy wins, he's only two more left for the Triple Crown.
That's for sure, but that F1 tenure is well past its due date, unfortunately. But it's a good thing to ponder for sure.
But so what do you think about? So if he's driving for Cadillac, right, or even if he drives for Hendrick, it puts him in a Chevy. When he drives a Honda and IndyCar, you think there's a bit of a conflict there? Or?
Nah. I wouldn't think so. It's not like
not at that
F1,
level,
like with Red Bull and Infinity.
All right, now I just remember a couple of years ago that what was it? Chevy wouldn't let it's either Ford, it wouldn't let Tony Stewart run in Foyt's car at the 500 because Ford was running a Toyota.
Yeah,
and he was a Chevy driver.
Tony
So
Stewart, an owner in one of the teams at that point in time, though.
yeah, and then I guess when Kurt Busch ran the 500, he was not allowed to run for a Chevy team. They were okay with him running a Honda team. Yeah. So that's what I just wondered, that because since Chevy and Honda compete directly in IndyCar, if there was any, kind of, but maybe
you
not.
Look at the actual
maybe not. Yeah.
And it's ECR that builds those Cadillac engines, not Hendrick. So
yeah.
On the Chevy front, so it's always a little bit of a, you know what I mean. There's always a little bit of a conflict of interest, no matter where you go, unless you stick with one car and one series your whole career.
This is quite
sure.
true. Yeah,
it makes much more sense than ARCA West being moved to a Friday and then it trucks at 10 p.m. Eastern for championship weekend. It makes as much sense. So there you go.
Okay, yeah, that was kind of way out of left field, but
I guess analogy there, but we'll take it.
Okay, yeah. So, all right, well, guys, we are out of time. So, Joey, thanks for coming on. I appreciate your IndyCar mid-season report. Richard, Louise, I always appreciate you guys every week. I want to thank Mark Dill, legend of the First Super Speedway, and Dan Blay, Racing Art, our sponsors for the show. I want to thank Spreaker, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Google Podcasts. Thank the Hoobazoo Radio Network. And I want to thank you folks who listen to us every week. Till next week, good night.
WHOOBAZOO, that's Hoobazoo.com.
Enter website, enter website, enter website, enter website.